Okay. I'm going to record it so I can save this. I feel like I have saved this before, but anyways, okay. So the purchase contract. So the purchase contract, we talked a little bit about like how to write the contract, but now we're going to get deep into it. So, okay. This is not working today. Okay. So does anybody remember why the purchase contract and the listing agreement start with the agency? Because the broker is an holder. Okay, that's a good answer, but no. Close. Anybody else? And again, the agency is the first thing that your client, whether you're representing a buyer or a seller or a tenant or a landlord, see how there's 4 options? So,
I can't even get in there.
okay. So, the reason is when you have a relationship with a buyer, what's the first thing you're supposed to do? Have them sign the agency to disclose your agency relationship with them. But nobody does that. No, nobody does that. So the state knows that. The state knows that nobody's having, like, if I meet Diego to show a house, the very first thing is I'm supposed to declare that I'm an agent and you are the buyer. And these are some basic rules that you're supposed to know about our relationship, but nobody does that. So they want the first thing that the client signs is this. And so I'm going to go a little deeper. I'm going to go a little deeper on it. So I'm going to give you the version I share with clients first, and then I'm going to tell you, like, I'm going to explain it to you as agents. Okay. So here's what I say if I'm speaking to a client. So I explain, this is just an agency form. It just says that I'm your agent and you are the blank. You are the buyer or you are the seller. And I just say that. That's usually suffices. It usually suffices to just say that. Okay. Hi, Sandy. So, okay, the reason it suffices, again, I'm going to say it one more time. This is just an agency form that says that I am the agent and you are the buyer. Okay, and so yeah, just go ahead and sign. I already checked off buyer. Just go ahead and sign here, and then I'll be signing here, and it just explains that I'm your agent. Okay, okay. Now the deeper version. Here comes the deeper version. The deeper version is, again, I'm going to use for the buyers. It explains that you are their agent and you have certain duties and responsibilities for that client. And so those that just got their license are probably especially like, yes, I remember this. So the big one is the F word. And I always say that because it can get your attention pretty fast. Fiduciary. That's right. Right. Okay. So you have a fiduciary relationship with that client. Fiduciary meaning that you put yourself before the client. So you put their needs and what is best for them before anything that will benefit you. Okay. And so I'll read a little bit. That idea is the following. I'll read at the top of it. The buyer's agent can. Okay, here we go. A fiduciary duty of utmost care, integrity, honesty, and loyalty in dealings with the buyer. So you probably remember which of the following is not, something that is a fiduciary, right? But these are the things: utmost care, integrity, honesty, and loyalty. Okay. If you're representing both, it explains that you have a fiduciary duty to either the person you are representing, if it's both. And if you represent both, you're supposed to both of them. And so sometimes, yeah, people will say, well, that's a conflict. I don't like that. I don't want you to be my agent because how do I know if you're usually it's the buyer that says that. How do I know that you're representing me and not the seller? And I say to that, by the way, that I am here to represent you and have your best interests. But when I represent both, yes, I'm not going to tell you what the seller wants for a price or what they're willing to do, but I'm going to tell you from the perspective of the buyer what I think it's worth, what the house is worth, or what I think I would do if I were you, right? Things like that. And again, pretending you represent the buyer. Down here, it says to the buyer's diligent exercise of reasonable skill and care in performance of the agent's duties. Fine. A duty to be honest and fair. Fine. A duty to disclose all facts known to the agent materially affecting the value or desirability of the property that are not known to or within the diligent attention and observation of the parties. An agent is not obligated to reveal to either party any confidential information obtained from the other party that does not involve the affirmative duties to set forth. Okay, so now let's explain in English. You represent just the seller, right? You represent just the seller, and the buyer, you come in contact with the buyer. If you know that the roof is leaking, right, representing the seller, you have a duty to tell the buyer that the roof is leaking. Fair? You can't hide that. You don't represent the buyer, but you still have a duty to make sure that your seller and or you explains the roof is leaking. Okay. Again, you represent the seller. And the seller says, we're selling because we're divorcing. And quite frankly, Michael, get me a damn offer. I'll take whatever I can. I don't care. You can't not go to the buyer and go, they'll take whatever you give them, whatever you want, they'll take it. Right? You can't, that's not fair, right? Okay. So you can't disclose something confidential that they told you, right? You're supposed to get them the most money for the house, represent them the best you would. And, if you took the ethics and orientation class through the Greater Downey yet, they use the term golden rule, do unto others as you want others to do unto you. Kind of like the same thing, right? That's a good rule that can take you through life and keep you on the up and up, right? Okay. So that's kind of agency. I will say right now, there are states that do not allow both buyer and seller to be represented by the same agent. Let's be clear. So, you know how they say, like, is voting a right or a privilege, right? I feel the same way about dual agency. Like, I find it to be kind of a privilege because I feel like, dang, they could pull that from us at any time. They never have, and I don't think they will, but there are several states that don't allow it. There are some states that say when it comes to dual agency, there are several states that say, okay, you can't represent them, but within the same brokerage, you can't represent the buyer, but you can refer it to another agent in the office. Like Adriana can represent that buyer. I represent the seller. Adriana can represent the buyer, even though we're under the same umbrella of Mel Bordelis and 24-Hour Real Estate. There are some states that take it one more step further and say, no, she can't represent the buyer either. I have to call, Edwin Huber down the street at Central 21 Peak and refer it to Edwin to represent my buyer. It sucks. But so what many times happens is I'll ask for a referral fee to refer Edwin, my buyer. Somewhere between 20 and 30%. Yeah. So if it's a buyer, many times it's lower because that buyer, that new buyer's agent will have to do a lot more work. Actually, I take it back. You're essentially giving that person, like, it's on a platter, right? All I'm telling Edwin is, Okay, here's the buyer, write up an offer, represent them, right? It's a done deal, right? Or more of a done deal. But in general, somewhere between 20 and 30%. Yeah. Okay, you good? Questions?
Yes. And
Go
for
ahead.
that 20%, you still have to break with a certain percentage with your brokerage itself.
Yes,
Yes.
that's correct. Yeah, whatever you're, and actually, I think, yeah. Okay. That's gonna keep happening. Jahira, can you still see?
Yeah, I can.
Something popped up on my screen and I lost it. That's why I asked. Okay, the second form is actually a pretty new form. This is the fair housing form. Okay, yeah, like obvious, right? We don't discriminate, you know, equal, we give equal rights to buyers, sellers, tenants, what have you. And all the protected classes have the right to buy or rent. Okay, I'm gonna leave it simple as that. So they did decide, and it actually has only been 3 or 4 years that they added this form. Yeah. Okay, this one, I kind of think that this is the most like duh form of all time. And I don't really see why they felt it necessary, but here it goes. So you're kind of telling your buyer, the reason I think the good one that I think is important is for the buyer. This is a form that as long as your buyer signed it, your buyer has an understanding that you or your brokerage may have shown or written an offer on the same house with multiple buyers. Fair? So like, best example would be 2 or 3 years ago, I was probably showing the same house to 10 buyers. I had so many buyers and there weren't enough listings. And so when one listing came up, I was showing the same house to 10 buyers. And do you feel like you're cheating? Oh, absolutely. Like you completely feel like you're cheating.
Oh, like you're cheating on your client.
Yeah, on every single one of them.
Hook with the same girlfriend.
Yes, it's like having, it's like you have 5 girlfriends. That's what it feels like, because you're like, oh yes, yeah, oh yes, you're gonna get the house, or you know, this is what we should write, and you're saying the same thing to every single one of your buyers. I think you should write, but there's a but. What is interesting, okay? Let's say you're in that position, and the house is listed for 900,000, and every single buyer says, "What should I offer?" And you open your mouth and say, "Well, here are the comps." And I personally feel that you're going to have to do at least 950 to get it. And let's say I did have 5 buyers. Probably 4 out of the 5 are going to be like, "You're nuts if you think I'm writing it for 950. I'll do 9 or I'll do 910." Right? And so that's how it always equals out. Like you give the same speech to all of them, and then one of them is usually that aggressive. However, this is the form that if they end up finding out that you represented, that's why this form is there. If they find out, "Oh, you represented so-and-so, you wrote an offer with me," right? What BS is that? They can't get mad they can't sue you. That's the key, right? They can't sue you because they signed this form. Okay. On the other side, the multiple sellers thing, I have a listing. Let's say I have a listing on Irwin Grove. And I'm explaining to that seller that your home, I may be showing your home on Irwin Grove to this buyer, but I may be taking that buyer and showing them other houses of mine, other listings. I'm not only going to show them your house. Fair? And then, of course, it goes over the dual agency thing, which we talked about. And then finally, the last one is a weird one. Here it goes. Offers not necessarily confidential. So let's go backwards in time 10 years ago. 10 years ago, if you have a listing and you have some offers, are you allowed to tell, as agents or buyers are calling you and they ask you, what kind of offers do you have? what's your highest offer? Are you allowed to tell them, oh yeah, it's listed for 9. Oh yeah, I have an offer for 875, 880, 9, and oh, I even have someone at 910. Are you allowed to say that? No, right? This is actually saying that if you have the permission of your seller, and I think it should be in writing, and it does say that, if they give you permission, you may disclose the price of the offer. I am not a proponent of what I just said. I think offers should be like we're playing poker, right? We're playing poker. I'm not going to tell you that I have a full house because that will alter when Diego takes his last card. That's going to alter whether Diego's going to stay in the game and keep betting or if he's going to fold because he knows I've got a good hand, right? So the same thing goes with offers. I don't think it's right to tell them. But I will give you a good example of when it does, it can be helpful. Here it goes. That house that was listed for 900, there's lots of offers. And I ended up getting an offer for, I got like offers of 950 and 975. Cindy calls me. And Cindy says, do you have offers? Yes, I have offers, a lot of offers. And then Cindy asks me, Michael, so I don't waste my time, can you tell me, can you give me some guidance? I think it's appropriate that if Cindy says out of her mouth, I'm going to write, my buyer wants to write for 910, just to do her a solid to say, you ain't close, Cindy. We have higher. We have higher. And I don't think it's a problem to say, yeah, I've got 975. Am I hurting the seller? No, I'm helping them because maybe Cindy's going to go back and say, Michael told me he's got 975. You want this house? Let's do $1 million, right? I think that'll get it. You know, maybe she talks to her client like that, but okay. So that's where it could be appropriate. And again, I say the word could because if you don't have your seller's permission, you can't do even what I just said. Okay. So I like to lay the groundwork with how I will work with somebody. If I feel we're going to be there, I lay the groundwork with the seller.
And how do you present that with the seller?
Hey, here's the different ways we can do this. We can either play poker, or if we get multiple offers, are you okay if I tell them the highest offer? I guess. Hmm?
Nothing. You're just self-fluent, like nothing.
Okay. I mean, that's one way, right? But now it's changed, so I don't get that cocky that I feel like we're going to get multiple offers on anything anymore.
For now.
It's still competitive, yeah. It's still competitive. You didn't get it? Yeah. You got outbid. Yeah.
And stop it, you know.
It was listed for what? Yeah. Yeah. So it's happening.
It's interesting to keep updating the people.
Yeah. Oh yeah, you'll see. You'll see when it closes.
Yeah.
Okay. Here comes my banking disclosure of the day. Wire fraud and electronic transfer stuff. This form was put because the single biggest white collar crime has occurred in the last 5 years. And it can go either way. If you represent the buyer, you're advising or warning your buyer that the following could happen, and so don't let it happen to your buyer. And that is that the buyer gets an email from what they think is the escrow officer with a copy of the wiring instructions. And again, I'm going to use an example. Our escrow officer downstairs, her name is Monica Castillo. So the buyer gets an email from Monica Castillo, and it looks very legit. It looks like it came from Monica. But if that buyer would have looked very closely, they would have seen that it said, like, instead of saying monica@escrownet.net, the hacker made a made-up email, because maybe they don't even know what her email is. It said monica1@escrownet.net or Monica C, 1976 at Gmail. And then sometimes you don't even see the email address. You just see, it says, oh, it came from Monica Castillo. They moved on with life. They opened it up. They sent it, or they went to the bank. They wired the money. And then they later, like a couple days later, Monica's like to the buyer, did you send your funds? Like, yeah, I sent my funds. What are you talking about? I haven't gotten it. And so then the buyer follows up and finds out, shoot, they wired the money to some other person, because the email that came from Monica got intercepted by a hacker. The hacker changed the ABA or routing number and the account number to theirs, and then made it look like it came from Monica. Wow. That is, I actually know of an agent that happened to, an agent that was buying a house that happened to.
Oh my gosh.
And their money is gone. So the FBI is obviously involved in this, right? At this point. So the FBI, if you find out fast enough, the FBI can start reversing things, not reversing, they can track it, you know, figure out the IP address of the person that sent the email, things like that.
So this
But very
basically-
sad, very
this
sad.
basically covers for
This is
us as the agent,
absolutely,
making us
yes,
buyer.
beware, beware. And we told you not to let that happen. Yes. And so it's saying, without reading everything, what would be a good idea if you got an email from Monica? If you got an email from Monica that says these are your wiring instructions, what do you think the best advice to your buyer would be? Call Monica. And so there are some escrow companies out there that put on their wiring instructions for the, like, they put the name of the bank, they'll put the ABA number, but then the account number is blank. And they actually make the client call. It says call for account number. So then it forces the client to call. It's a good way. So, or the other way is you get this, they advise call Monica or call the escrow company and say, hey, I'd like to read back to you. Can I read it back to you? That's a good idea. Okay, now the other way. The other way is even crappier. Huh? Yeah, so they don't allow cashier's checks.
Oh, they don't?
They do not allow. And so that is actually part of the problem. Oh, I'm sorry. With buyers, they don't allow buyers to bring in a cashier's check anymore at the end. At the end. The original, and we're going to get to this in a second, so I won't say that, but you can either wire or do a check. But at the end, it has to be a wire. And that is because of the movie Catch Me If You Can.
Oh, okay.
Anybody see Catch Me If You Can with Leonardo DiCaprio? I love that movie. I can watch it over and over, even though it's like 3 hours. Okay, spoiler alert. Spoiler alert. So Leonardo DiCaprio plays, pretends to be a pilot for Pan Am, which was a very famous airline in the 60s and 70s. He pretends to play a pilot because he realizes, he looks over there and goes, oh my God, those pilots are such nicely dressed up. They're so nicely dressed up, and they get like when they went to the bank to cash their check, like the teller was just like, oh my God, and just like let them cash their check.
Oh,
Like
they
didn't
check that.
give them a problem, didn't check ID. You know, they take off their hat, yes ma'am, you know, and it's like, oh my God, it's like that, right? So he goes, and he's like young. He goes, I'm gonna be a pilot. I'm gonna pretend to be a pilot. So he gets the ID card. He even goes on airplanes as the co-pilot. He's like living the life. And so he gets his first check from Pan Am. And then after that, he starts taking the checks, and he goes to his hotel room or his apartment and fills the bathtub with hot water and takes the check and gets like the emblem, the Pan Am emblem, to come off. So then he can put it on another check, and he starts making fake checks.
I need to watch that.
Such a scammer. And by the way, it's a true story. Yeah, so I show you. So he ends up, so now the reason it's called Catch Me If You Can, because you ain't catching me. he uses different IDs, he uses different names over time. And who's the guy that's trying to catch him? Tom Hanks. Tom Hanks plays the guy from the FBI that's trying to catch him. So anyways, point is that a cashier's check could be fake. People have tried to use cashier's checks. So now wires only. Wires only. So that's with buying, yes.
I've never done a transaction, that's why.
Go
I'm
ahead.
trying to process this in my mind. When it's a seller,
Okay, which is coming next.
yeah, when it's a seller, they get to choose the escrow company, but when it's the buyer, do they get to choose the escrow?
No.
company? No, it's just always a seller.
So it's usually the seller or the listing agent that gets to choose the escrow company, yes.
Oh, okay.
It's called seller's choice of services, which is kind of a misnomer. It's really listing agent's choice of services. Because, unless the seller has an aunt that owns an escrow company, or, they're going to use whoever the listing agent wants to use.
Usually the one downstairs.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, seller side is even sadder. It's a worse story. So the seller, with your escrow instructions, you have a lot of forms. We're going to talk about it in the escrow class, but you have a lot of forms that are tax related. Like, in other words, when you close escrow, do you have to pay taxes or not? And we'll save that for that class, okay? But after the tax forms, one of the forms says, hey, seller, do you want, at the end of your escrow, do you want to get a check from escrow, or do you want a wire? If you choose wire, this same thing applies. When you have the form and you as the seller need to fill out the net proceeds sheet, and it says wire, name of your bank, routing number of your bank, account number, name on the account, you're going to write that in. Don't email it. That's the worry. So in other words, you as the innocent seller wire to Monica downstairs, you wire your wiring instructions, your net proceeds with your wiring instructions, where you want your net proceeds to go to. Well, Mr. or Mrs. Hacker hacked your email, intercepted it, changed it to their ABA and routing, ABA and account number. And then when Monica went to wire your proceeds at the very end, oh, I emailed your proceeds. Okay, let me look. I haven't got them yet. Finally, Monica's like, okay, let's talk about this. Can you read to me the account number and the ABA number? And then I'm on the other line, I'm the seller, and she reads it, and I'm like, that's not my numbers. Why? Because the hacker intercepted it, and goodbye. So, I've done transactions where someone got as little as $0 from their net proceeds, of course, and I've seen people get as much as, the most I've ever seen is $1.5 million as a wire. And could you imagine if $1 million was wired to the wrong person? Could you imagine? That has not happened here ever. I do know, that's right. I do know of an agent down the street. And so here's the telltale story. It was $400,000. And here's the interesting part. The buyer asked to choose the escrow company. The buyer. Oh, we got a great escrow company. In fact, the escrow fee for your seller will be nothing, or it'll be nominal. It'll be $500 flat fee if you use, and there's actually escrow companies that will say, oh, really low fee. So they use that buyer's escrow company, and that escrow company ended up disappear. The money disappeared.
Was this like the agent's fault at that point, or was this one not a thing?
No, the form was the thing, but no. Yeah, I mean that's an example, but this was before the wire fraud thing was a thing. This was actually before email. This was before email. So, but I mean, my point is, okay, yes, it's a bad example for this, but you get my idea. However, it is a public service announcement as to why, if you represent a seller, use an escrow company that you know of or that we recommend, because you just never know. Okay. Okay. Now the contract. Yes, Diego.
Insurance, like,
Oh, I mean, the escrow company has insurance, bonds up the wazoo. Mhm, mhm. So, okay. Yeah, so every escrow company has to be bonded and licensed and have. Okay, now the contract. And I spent all that time, and we're okay. I mean, I just think it's important to have that stuff down. All right, now the contract. Date is here. Okay. First tip of the day. You represent the seller. You represent the seller. You get this offer. Okay. You go to do a counter offer. And on the counter offer, it says counter offer to the offer dated. And so everyone asks, when I have to write on that counter offer, what date do I put for when for the offer? It's this date right here. It's not the date that the buyer signed the offer. It's the date it was prepared. Okay, I'll show you a counter offer at the end. So that's a little bit of foreshadowing, I guess, or whatever you want to call it. Okay, put the buyer's names here. You put this. All this is good. We already talked about this last week. First big one is here. Check off who represents both. Who represents who? Check it off. If you don't, good old Carmen's going to make you do a confirmation of agency form, an extra damn form you have to get signed. Who wants more forms? You have enough. Okay. You put in the brokerage's license number, your license number, and so on. Brokerage, and then yours. Okay. Here we go. Purchase agreement. You have a price. You have the time of the escrow is here. You have to check this box off. Be careful. Okay. You have an initial deposit. Your initial deposit goes here. And I should not have used this. This is a terrible one to use. This is like monopoly money here with 3.8 million. Sorry. And so here's your next question of the day. What is the maximum deposit? What percent is the maximum deposit that you should ever put as your deposit on an offer? Max is higher than 2. Higher than 2%. It just looks terrible because we're using this huge number, but what is Diego, what is it? Do you know? What? Percent? Huh? 3%. So 3% is the deposit, the max. Now, you represent buyers. You're writing an offer, right? If you want to impress them, do 3%. If you want to protect them, do less. All right? So just weigh it. If you know it's competitive, you're trying to be competitive, do more. If you're trying to be a little more cautious, do less. I think 2% is a happy medium. Okay. Well, yeah, that's a good thing. But the initial deposit shows your buyer's commitment or your buyer's seriousness. I mean, that's the point, I guess. 2 is a good happy medium. So 1% is the lowest you should ever do. 3% is the highest. You will see agents, let's say on a $500,000 offer, just use that as an example. You will see some agents from some neighboring cities do $1,000, and you should laugh in their face. Yeah. You should.
I mean, that's like not
don't
even the deposit for an apartment.
Right. So you'll see that. And I always like to say they were just taught wrong. They don't know better. Right. They think they're doing their buyer protecting them or whatever. Also, if they do 1,000, it also could mean that they're not serious about buying this house at all. That's what it tells me.
So for the date, it's always 45 days.
No, good question. Good question. Cash. She was asking here. See right here, 45 days. Is 45 days the norm?
Oh, okay.
The answer is, what would you say?
Well, just
it depends.
The seller has to buy.
Yep. They may have it in the remarks, yeah. Or ask the seller, ask the listing agent. If you want to get on a listing agent's good side before you write an offer, call them up and say, hey, I'm about to write an offer. Is there anything I need to know? Anything you want to see in the offer? Such as like, what kind of close date are you looking for? Okay. I want to go the other way for a second. So 3%, Diego told us 3%, and that's correct. 3% is the highest. So 3% of almost 4 million, that's like almost 120,000, let's say, okay? What if you wrote $500,000, which is over 10%? Let's say this is a cash deal. Let's say we're talking 3.8 million and it's a cash deal, and the close of escrow, since Maria asked, the close of escrow was 21 days because it was cash. There's no loan, there's no nothing. Let's pretend we made it 21. And I really want to show how serious I am. And I did my buyer did a $500,000 deposit. And then we get into escrow and for some reason it cancels. Actually, let's take it a different way. I wrote no contingencies, which we're not going to do ever, but I wrote no contingencies, cash offer. And then I get 1 week into the escrow and already my contingencies are removed, which means I have no excuse to back out, which means if I back out, what happens to the deposit? Gone, right? But it's 500,000. What happens to the 500,000? Does the buyer lose all 500,000?
No.
That's where I'm going with this. So the most, even if you are that gutsy to write a $500,000 deposit, if it went to court or arbitration because the seller was pissed off that the buyer canceled for whatever reason after the contingencies were removed, the most damages that the seller can retain is 3%. So they'll keep about 110, 120,000, but the other almost 400,000, the seller will have to give back. Okay. Now we all feel better now. Yeah. All right. So to answer your question, 30-day is a good number. It shows that it shows me, if you wrote 30, I'm hoping that meant that you got your client already qualified, that your loan officer said, yeah, I can close it in 30 days, no problem. 45 is usually going to be because maybe you have something hairy going on that you're not telling me. Maybe you had to sell a house first. Maybe you told me in the offer that it was contingent on you selling something. So maybe that's why you did it. Or maybe like in this case, these people are in their 70s. They have a 7,000 square foot house with a lot of furniture. Oh, you saw it. You saw this house. Okay. A 7,000 square foot house with a lot of furniture, and they're elderly and they just need time to move. Okay. All right. Maria, are you looking for something?
No.
You're good? Okay. Yeah.
Wait, is this house pending?
This is the one. That's why I was like, oh, why did I use this one? But it's okay. I just picked it out of I just picked it. I shouldn't have, but that's
No, but
okay.
it's still like pending.
It's
like, it hasn't
pending.
been sold.
No, it hasn't
Oh.
closed. Hasn't closed. Just did the inspection last week. Okay, so then percent down, this person was putting, what percent down was the person putting? It's not a trick question, by the way, but what percent down is the person putting overall between the deposit and the remainder of deposit and all that? What's the percentage that they're putting down? Huh? 25. Yes. And that was obvious because it said 75% loan, right? Okay. And that brings me to having to write an offer one more time. If you had to write an offer and it was 25% down, you have to bust out a calculator on your own and do 0.75 times 3.8. And whatever number you get for that, you have to write here on your own. You have to do that math.
So for E1, it's on the street.
You have to figure it out. Yeah. So if it's, give you an example, let's say this was FHA and this was let's say $700,000 FHA. What is it? And do you remember what the down payment is for FHA?
3.5?
3.5. So if it's 3.5, what's the loan amount? Percentage wise? Just if it
90 something.
Keep-
97%.
96.5. Right. So if it's 700,000 and they're FHA, you're going to take a calculator and do 0.965 times 700. And then that's what you're going to write under loan amount. And then after you write it, it will magically say 96.5. What would be really nice, and this is my like suggestion box for CAR,
percentage.
Why don't they allow me to write 96.5 and the minute I write the price, it puts in the loan amount for me? They should do that. They really should do that. So, I think they will eventually. Give it a couple years. But anyways, okay. So then the minute you write this in, it instantly puts the balance. If you put a price, if you would put a deposit and you put the loan amount, it will instantly put their balance of down payment for you. Okay. Have to talk about a few other little nitty gritties.
Right, so was
Go
the
ahead.
balance of down payment that automatically
Happened
shows up?
the minute you put in the sales price and the minute you put in the deposit and the minute you put in a loan amount. Okay, now watch this. Let me just do this. Watch this. So right now, let's do this. Okay, ready? Right now, I'm making this look like it's an all cash deal. Fair enough? I put 3.8. What's the balance of purchase price? 3.8, right? Okay, now the deposit. Let's say I put for the deposit 100,000. What's the balance of down payment going to show? Huh? Yeah, 3.7, right?
Yeah.
Okay, it's changing. Now I have to bust out the calculator one more time, and I have to do. Go ahead.
Oh, I just wanted to see it.
Okay, so you have to do. So I'm going to do 0.75 times 3,800,000. I get 2,850,000. So I put that here. That's what we were talking about. Now watch what's going to happen to balance of purchase price the minute I do this. It changes. It changes to whatever's left over. It's the leftovers. It's like what you're going to have to come in at the end. Plus your closing costs. You have to add your closing. Okay. Okay. So what are you telling the seller is going to be the type of interest rate you are going to get when you get your loan? What is the default?
Wait, this week?
Yeah, what kind of interest rate? Fixed or adjustable is the default? Let me- Fixed, right here. See it? Okay, that's one thing. Another thing, if you want to ask the seller to pay points, you would write it in here. So you want to watch out for that. If you're a listing agent, don't let people sneak shit by you. That's what. So like, let's say the buyer wants to buy down their rate and they want to ask. They want to buy 1 point, let's say. So they write 1 point here. So if you wrote that in, you're telling, actually, I take that back. There's nothing sneaky. They changed it. I take it back.
Okay.
They take it back. Buyer to pay up to 1 point. So I don't know. I mean, you're just saying it that the buyer is going to be paying 1 point to buy down their rate a little bit. And what does 1 point mean, by the way? It's 1% of their loan amount. Okay. So never mind what I said. Okay, one more thing. What was that? I have one. Is what? 1 point means literally 1%. I will verify that by 1 o'clock.
Maybe he was just saying.
Yeah. Okay, I will say it a different way. It depends, like 1 point may reduce your rate 0.125 only, or maybe when the market is different, maybe 1 point will reduce your rate 0.25%. So rates come and go, and so sometimes it takes more to reduce your rate, and it depends how much you want to reduce your rate. So yeah, but I will find out. But I mean, the word point means percent.
Yeah.
So okay, so again, this is a terrible example because it's so much, but what if it was FHA? You want to check off this box called FHA. Now watch what's going to happen on my screen. You're going to see the computer thinking. Here it comes. See that?
Yeah.
It generated a form called FHA VA amendatory clause. It generated another form that your buyer is going to need to sign. Same thing for this called the VA one. Okay. And it's called the FVAC form, FHA veteran and FHA or VA amendatory clause. Okay. I think this is important right here. So right now the interest rates are, I got my handy dandy, I have a lender that I don't use, sorry. That he sends me twice a week, he sends me the rates, which I love. So he says this week, actually, I'll read it. It's Tuesday, the 7th. Rates got smoked again this morning the wrong way. My best guess as to why is that the job report last Friday was wonderful. So wonderful news for the economy makes the rates go up. Also, there's speculation the feds may continue to increase the rates. Conforming rate under 726,000 is now up to 6.125 with a quarter to a half a point. That's how much it would. If you want to get your rate down to 6.125, it'll cost you a little bit. FHA under 726 is 5.25, and over 726 FHA is 5.5. VA under 726 is 5.25, and over it's 5.375. And the jumbo rates, which is like way higher, I think like around I think it's 987,000 and above, or about $1 million. Jumbo rates are 6%. Okay, why am I saying this? And I guess since we're using this obnoxious price for it's jumbo, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so jumbo rates, this guy's told me jumbo rates are 6%. So if I write in 5.875%, oh boy, I get into the escrow, and at the very end, this is going to be touchy. This is a touchy subject, but at the very end, the buyer, his rate is 6.25, and he says, "Oh, since it's 6.25, I'm not buying it." I said, if I don't get 5.875 or less, I'm not buying the house at all. I'm canceling. Give me my money back. That's the touchy subject. If all your contingencies were removed, can you bail because of that? Okay, we'll ask Marie later today. I think the answer is if you removed all your contingencies, you can't bail because of that. You cannot. So sometimes as a listing agent, when you see this, do you know how you counter? If you're a listing agent, you counter with buyer's loan to be best prevailing rate and terms. Meaning, I don't care what your rate is, you're buying this house. You can't come crying to me that your interest rate was 6.25 if you wrote that. So again, in a counter, I would write, to counter this out, I would write buyer's loan to be best prevailing rate and terms. Best prevailing rate and terms. In the counter. That's what I would write as the counter. Yes. Okay. There is controversy over that, and I'm not going to make this too controversial because you guys haven't done this long enough to feel the controversy. But the controversy is whether that's even legal to write that as a listing agent. That's the issue. So I still write it. Sue me. I've never had it come bite me in the butt yet. It hasn't been an issue, but careful. All right. Okay, sometimes there's additional financing. And in 2004, you would see a lot of people get first and seconds. They would do no money down. So they would get an 80-20 loan. They get an 80% first and a 20% second. 80% first and 20% second. Or they would put 5% down. So they would get an 80-15-5. An 80% first, a 15% second, and they were putting 5% of their own funds. Or one last one, a 90-10-10. 90% first, 10% second, and 10% of their own money. We don't see that as much anymore. Alex Asensio does first and seconds a lot, actually. He's the one that I notice will do it. And so it's actually a creative way, because I want to give you one example where first and seconds can be beneficial. First off, the big one where you see it is with something called Cal HFA. Oh, maybe I'm messing that up. Basically, there's some first-time buyer programs where they'll give you what's called a silent second. So you'll write that here. You'll explain that, and you'll write that second in here. That's what I'm getting at, okay? But I want to give you an example with the good old days where you did seconds more. And let me give you an example. I'm going to make this up. Okay, this isn't make-believe. This has actually happened. $2 million sales price. $2 million sales price. The buyer got a loan for $1 million. And they wanted a second for 500. And the maximum that you could get back then was 500,000. The reason that buyer wanted to do it, the buyer could buy the house without selling their house, but they wanted to, they didn't have as much money. But when they sold their other house, they were going to pay off the second. They were going to pay off the $500,000 loan the minute they closed escrow on their other house. So that's sometimes. And then the cool part about that $500,000 second, it's what's called an equity line of credit, a HELOC, a home equity line of credit. A HELOC is like a credit card on a house. So if you have a $500,000 HELOC with zero balance, you can go buy a car and write a check from the HELOC to buy the car all cash. Let's say it's $50,000. So now you have $50,000 balance on your HELOC for the car that has no loan now. Yes. Is that so the question was, Diego said, is that using your house as a bank? Yes. It is not a good idea. Definitely. But some people do it. And so why would you do that? Because the interest rate on the HELOC maybe at the time was really low.
Or you need to qualify.
So the person that did it had an interest rate of 3.75 on the HELOC. And the interest rates overall were like 5. So why the HELOCs were that low? It was kind of just a balance act. Like it was just a catch back then. Somehow it worked well.
And, how does it secure the buyer for them to also be able to afford the HELOC?
If you can afford it, if the person that did it could afford they could afford buying the $2 million house and the house they hadn't sold yet, they could afford it.
It's only in that situation.
It's only if you can afford it, yeah. Or again, let's say an 80-20. So like, okay, here comes the example. It's actually this guy that I saw the example. Ready? This guy, before I sold him this house, I wrote an offer for 5.8. 5.8.
For
Okay.
the same property.
For this same guy on a different property.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so 5.8. So the maximum loan when you get jumbo, many lenders don't want to do more than 3 million.
Jumbo meaning 2 loans.
No, jumbo just meaning a hell of a lot of money,
Oh, okay.
like a big loan.
Oh.
Okay.
Explain jumbo. Okay.
So jumbo is, I think jumbo after about $1 million.
Oh, okay.
But then after that million start, like many want to do 3 million. And so I'm giving you this example, and it's maybe not the greatest example, but here it goes. My guy wanted to do 25% down. So 5,800,000 times 25% was 1,450,000. So he wanted a loan. He wanted a loan for 75% of 5,800,000, which is 4,350,000. And the lender he went to said, I can't do it. I can only do 3 million. And he went, I want a loan for $4 million. Like, I want a loan for this. So his lender couldn't do it, but his lender told him, I can do a first for 3 million and a second for 1.35 million. There was no catch, but the second was a high interest rate. That's the catch.
Okay.
Yeah. So my buyer's like, oh, hell no. Like, 8, 9%. And it's adjustable. The HELOCs are adjustable, by the way, most of the time.
So it can go higher.
So it'll go higher. If the rates go higher, if the bond market goes higher, that's what's going to go higher. So he's like, oh, I don't want that. So he ended up finding a lender that was going to do it otherwise. But sometimes people do this. So, but again, the most traditional way back then, and even now, you can do like an 80. If you were 5% down, you can do an 80% first and a 15% second. And that would go, my long-winded story, that would go here. Okay, on E2. All right.
Just for the
Yes.
record, on interest deposit is
Yes.
money to-
Yes, I did not, and that's a great one, and thank you. Okay, so Juan only did, okay, watch this. Let's mess with this. He did a 50,000 initial deposit. And if we're being honest, that's a little wimpy for $4 million. That's a little like low, right? It's not even close to 3%. But maybe he's a stockbroker, I don't know. And so he has to like sell off a stock to get it liquid for the deposit. And he says, I'll do 50 now, but after I remove contingencies or so many days after, I will increase my deposit. That's how it's used. So increase deposit. And so I'll do an additional 100,000, or let's do it. I'll do. Okay.
Percentages are seen the same even at that price point?
Yeah, I mean, yeah. So, I mean, you can go whatever you want, but there's percentages and then the max is 3%. Okay, so now here's the part, Maria, here it comes. I'm gonna give that extra 70 so many days, I'm gonna do or 10 days after acceptance. That's one way. Okay. Or I'll do this, or upon removal of contingencies, actually that's the default. Or I can do on a certain date. So here are your choices. Oh, it's not happy.
Oh, it actually has parentheses date. Alright.
Mhm. Okay, so those are your choices. Your choices are upon removal of contingencies, or a certain date, or you could write something silly like I wrote, 10 days after acceptance or whatever. But what's the default?
Removal.
Yeah. So that was the silly part that I even wrote any of that. Yeah, I didn't have to, if I wrote nothing, if I get rid of all of this, the default is that I will bring in another 70,000 when I remove all my contingencies. Yeah. Okay. I've done it once. I did it myself. When I bought my house that I'm in now, I did that.
And would you put a date? Just be nosy. Or remove
They
all
didn't
of it.
have this contract back then. I wrote 20,000 deposit and I'll increase it to 50. I'll increase it to 50 when I remove my contingencies. And I had to write it in. And the only reason I did that was I was waiting to close escrow on some other houses.
Keeping it,
Huh?
the benefit of that.
The benefit of
Like doing that. increase.
doing it, I mean, sometimes the reason you do it is because you don't want to put up as much money until you're serious about the house.
But it's not, that's not using.
Right. Okay, this one here is a big one. Occupancy type. What is the default type of buyer? Is it's the house they're going to live in, or is it investment? Primary. So that's why it's there like that. There's no boxes checked off. So the default is it's your primary residence. Why is that important? It's for financing.
Yeah, right. So if it's a first buyer,
If-
then
if-
you're getting that
yeah.
in-house.
It has to be primary. Or if it's a 1031 exchange, which is an investment, they want to see that it's an investment. The lender's going to want to see that that was an investment. Okay. All right. Okay, so Juan is poor, apparently, in my little fictitious world I'm about to show you. Juan doesn't have money. Juan wants some help with closing costs. So Juan decided he wanted to ask the seller to help him with closing costs. He's just smart, huh? So he wrote that he wanted $100,000, which that's silly, but let's not do that. Actually, so your closing costs are usually, like, if you want to just talk about this, on average, the buyer's closing costs are going to be about 2% on average, 2% of the loan amount. 2% of loan amount. So my loan amount was 2.8. So that's like 57,000 or so. So like I wrote 57,000. Now watch what it's gonna do. It's gonna show percentage of purchase price. But usually lenders talk in loan amounts. So
Well,
yeah, so, okay, so as a buyer's agent, this is where, if you want to ask for closing costs, this is where you would write it in. As a listing agent, beware of this box. Don't let someone put this past you. You get into escrow thinking you sold this house for 3.8, and you get into escrow and the escrow officer explains to you that, oh, well, you're giving the buyer, your seller's giving the buyer a $57,000 credit. Shoot, yikes. Okay. Do you know how have you heard about, and I don't want to get into this, but the 2-1 buy down, have you heard?
I've heard of it, but I don't
Okay.
understand.
Oh, wait.
pretty quick.
So what I'm getting at is the following, the 2-1, food over here, probably. He's bringing food. For the meeting, for Andy? For Andy? It's in here, the food. Yeah. You, over there. Yeah.
We'll take care of it.
Yeah, well, no one, let's not tell anyone, we'll just eat it now. Let me just tell Carmen it's here.
I should probably watch a YouTube video. But you won't buy that.
I'll explain it I'll explain it real quick. It's not bad. It's just it's like a fad right
I
now.
cringe, so I'm like,
I cringe because it's kind of a fad. Okay, so here, lenders are offering, okay, so here,
They don't want to get creative.
Yeah. Yeah.
Getting their interest rate.
lower. So the interest rate right now, we just said was like, let's say 6.25. So a 2-1 buy down is the first year, the first 12 months of your loan, the interest rate will be 4.25. The second year, so from like the entire second year, your buyer's interest rate will be 5.25. And after those 2 years are over, for the rest of the loan, it will be 6.25 for the next 28 years.
Do they have to pay upfront?
Oh, heck yes.
Which
So
is-
that's where the fun begins. That's where the fun begins. So you're asking the seller to pay the interest for the first year, buying all the interest from 6.25 and 4.25. You're asking the seller to pay that interest. Hi, Mom. And you're asking the seller to pay the interest for the second year. So whatever the gap was that the lender didn't pay, you're asking the seller to pay it. So give you an example, on a $830,000 sale with 10% down, whatever that loan amount is, to buy down the rate with the stupid 2-1 buy down, it costs the seller $17,000. Because they're just paying the interest up front to give the buyer that nice, happy 4.25 for the first year and 5.25 for the second.
Our sellers usually.
If they're desperate and they want to sell, so that's why, because for a while it's been a little more difficult to sell a house, lenders said, oh, why don't you ask the seller for some closing costs?
Why lenders are like, well,
Yeah, with the 2-1 buy down.
Yeah. So the buyer never has to pay it.
The buyer doesn't have to pay it, but you have to ask. So the buyer would pay it if the buyer wanted to pay it. But why is the buyer going to pay that? The buyer, if the buyer's going to do that, why not just take the 6.25? Why buy down the rate?
That's true, because it's not way people think, oh, my money
It's all
is
mental,
lower.
right? That's why
Wait.
I would prefer take the 17,000 and just get my rate from the beginning until the end, get my rate lower. Well, I would ask my lender, okay,
That's
so
true.
how much is 17,000, which is paying points? How much is 17,000 going to lower my rate from 6.25? What will my rate be? And then, okay, fine. I'll ask the seller for the 17,000. I don't like it. I don't get it. Huh?
Because they're asking the seller to pay it instead of the buyer.
Well, because like, it's magic. So like, look, Diego, look behind here. It's nothing. It's nothing. So like, you're very excited that your payment the first year is based on a 4.25. And it's almost like I didn't tell you. Right,
So
right. Yeah, and
that's
the way,
what's in their mind.
Yeah. and the way a lender looks at it, you're easing your buyer into their payment. You're easing them in. Okay, all right. I mean, the maximum is 3%, was what she wanted me to tell you that. So the maximum is 3%. There are some lenders that will allow 6%, which is nuts. But in general, most lenders, you can't ask the seller to pay more than 3% of closing costs.
That's a lot.
It's a lot. Yeah.
So one last question.
Yes.
There's times where I see that they'll say like, oh, with a seller's credit of 34 grand. Is that the thing? I'm assuming that was it, for like seller's credit
I
of.
mean, that's a big credit.
Yeah,
And
I
that's,
know,
that
like,
must be a
what is
big,
it? I've seen.
yeah, that's a lot. Yeah, so that, I don't know the circumstance why they
Okay.
did that.
Okay, maybe
That's-
another thought, but that's what it's talking about.
Yeah,
That is-
yeah. And what we were talking about up here about points, what my mom was saying, that's the idea, right? And again, you don't know how much 1 point will reduce it. You have to ask the lender because it changes as the market changes.
Unless we put fixed rate.
Oh, it's always fixed. The default is fixed. Yeah. But in terms of what that rate is going to be, if you want to buy it down, you can write here points. All right. Okay, I'm going to keep going. You know how we talked about if there was a second, sometimes people will write other things in here under additional financing terms. And again, for the longest time, all the agents that have been in the business for more than 2 years, if they wanted to ask the seller for closing costs, they would say, seller to credit buyer $10,000 towards buyer's closing costs. And they would write it in under additional financing terms. Now you don't have to do that. Now you can write it up here. Now they have a place for it. They have a place, you just put the number in.
You like that box.
I got excited, no. I mean, and I'm also trying to tell them, beware of that box. If you're a listing agent, you won't catch it. And then all of a sudden you're in escrow and what? I have to give the buyer money. Yeah. All right. So now it's going to get nitty gritty. So here are. Okay, so you have 3 days if you are, so here's just some basics. You have 3 days to show your funds, like your proof of funds. However, what do most listing agents want when you send the offer? Like, are they going to give you 3 days after you get an escrow to show them how much, to show them that you have a bank statement? No, they want it up front, right? So that's why I never understand why they put this in. So, but anyways, you attach it usually, yeah, yeah. Okay, here's a question that always comes up. So when do you have to do your walkthrough, your final verification? You have 5 days. Okay, so that's why that's in there.
I mean, would it be a good habit to do like the second day possible? Like this?
So you're doing it towards the end, and usually you do it when your buyers are about to sign their loan documents. You kind of like, you sign your loan documents, you go to the house and do your walkthrough to make, and what I always say is, like, what if we were in escrow, but there was no repairs done? You're still going to the house to make sure it's still standing, to make sure the house is still, the purpose of a walkthrough is to make sure, right? So the term that's used is that the house is in equal or better condition than what you originally saw. Equal or better condition. Okay, not worse. So if you go to do a walkthrough and that wall has a big hole in it because when they moved their couch, they bashed it, that's why. Yes. Yes. So, okay, one other thing about a walkthrough. You can't be at the very end and see that there's a hole here in the wall and then say, I'm not buying the house. That's it. No, the house is crap. I'm not buying it. What do you have to allow the seller to do?
Fix it, repair.
Fix it. Right. So the term is that walkthrough is not a contingency. It's not a contingency of the deal. In other words, you can't use the walkthrough as a reason you don't buy the house. Okay. All right.
It's not already by default.
In the further in this contract, which I'm sharing it with you this way because they've changed how this works. It explains that it actually says, okay, I better say this now. Okay. See how we have these items that Cindy has kept me honest about when we've been referring to it, we say like, D1 for the deposit. Okay. Then there's another one where it says paragraph number, right? Okay. So the item that we're speaking of when we're talking about the walkthrough, it's item J. Okay. However, it says something about paragraph 16. And guess what? I have to scroll down to paragraph 16 to find them to talk about the walkthrough. This is the new way, this darn form. So here it says, buyer shall have the right to make a final verification of the property condition within the specified time in paragraph 3J, which was 5 days before we close. And it is not a contingency of the sale, but solely to confirm the property is maintained pursuant to the contract, that repairs have been made as agreed, and the seller has complied with their obligations. Fair enough? Okay. So my point to this is, here's my point. My point is that we have an item here, and then the explanation of the item is below. They've changed this contract to make it so it's nice and pretty. So anything you need to write is on the first 4 pages, and all the explanation is below. So that's why I'm kind of giving you the explanation as we go instead of reading line by line. Yes. Okay. All right. So assignment request. I'll make this really quick. I wrote on the contract ABC LLC. In other words, I'm the buyer on an LLC called ABC LLC, but I plan on like doing a bait and switch. No, that's a bad word. Bad word. Okay. I plan on so like my mom's really going to buy it. And she has an LLC called the Canton, Ohio LLC. Right? We were buying it all cash. But I was like going to show you my cards, and then whoop, there she is. I can change while I'm in escrow. I can change the buyer. That's called an assignment. Assignments are frowned upon a little bit. Okay, a lot of it. But I'm just explaining that's what an assignment is. So how long does someone have, according to this, if I want to switch it to my mom, how long do I have to make that decision? Within the 17 days.
Doesn't that affect the loan or anything?
Well, in this case, maybe we were all cash or whatever. Yeah. Okay. Investors are the big ones that do it.
It'll affect a lot of things.
It's going to affect a lot of things. All right. So now here comes the contingency box. And what does it go over and over? How many days for everything? 17. 17 days to get your loan, your appraisal, inspections, reviewing any paperwork. 17 days. So I said, if you want to look competitive, maybe that's a suggestion. If you want, or if you are doing a counter offer and you want to like kind of put the screws to the buyer. So you would reduce the time frame. But this is where, okay. So on the side though, it says I can remove my loan contingency. And this is where, since Marie's in the room, this is where Marie starts twitching.
I'm twitching already.
Right. And the broker is twitching too. Okay. So it's here for a reason, because sometimes you use it, but you will never use it unless you get the permission of Marie or me. Okay.
You can have them louder.
Unless you get the permission of management. It's okay. It's all good.
Oh, no,
It's okay.
give me my
I mean,
feedback.
we did Smart Start at 11 today
Oh, today, that's-
instead of Wednesday. Yeah, just today. Because I'm going to Palm Springs tomorrow.
Oh, I was gonna say, so we can go on Wednesday, Thursday?
I can't.
All right.
Yeah.
I'll let you know.
Okay. Um,
And
Oh, to remove
all
contingencies.
new agents, all of your offers and documents that are on the forms need to be reviewed by men.
yeah, so when you write an offer, you have to have Marie look it over or me. Okay? All right. If you are, well, we'll leave it at that. Okay, so Cindy brought it to my attention that last week when we were doing an offer, I was trying to say that if you want to make it competitive, maybe you'll do something like 7 days to do your inspections, and maybe 10 days for the appraisal, and maybe 14 for the loan. If you want to show them, kind of impress them. Or if you're giving a counter offer, that's how I would maybe give a counter. Okay,
Can I say something?
go ahead.
I know you don't want me to hear other stuff.
That's okay. It's all good.
Good. How many did you say for appraisal?
Seven.
Inspection 7,
And appraisal,
10.
make sure you check with your lender and make sure it's doable. Because then you'll be putting yourself in a really bad situation when you have a lender who can't perform and then you need an extension. Because once you don't have your contingencies removed, you are out of contract.
However, so what happens right now on day 18? Like, okay, we're in escrow, 17 days goes by, and on the 18th day, we're on 18th day, and your buyer actually your buyer cancels. Your buyer just says, I don't want to buy the house.
They can't.
Do they lose their deposit? Because that's what this all has to do with. You have the right to cancel anytime, even after you removed your contingencies, but you're going to lose your deposit, right? Or up to 3%, right? Okay, but on day 18, your buyer just wakes up and cancels.
Did everybody know that?
Yes. Yeah, about the deposit, yes. Okay, so what happened on day 18? Do they lose? They woke up and they called you and said, I don't want to buy it. Do they lose their deposit? We have a yes, not yet. Yes or no, and yes or no, and why? Okay, here it comes. You have to remove the contingencies in writing. It's called a form. The form is called contingency removal. And on the side here, it makes reference to that form called the contingency removal right here. Okay. Later on in this contract, it goes in nauseam about it. Okay. So if your buyer has not in writing removed the contingencies, they can't keep your deposit. Okay. So the name of the form real quick.
It's a separate form.
It's a separate form, so I just want to, I'm just showing it to you real quick. Yeah. Yeah. So here it comes. This is the form. And the reason the reason I'm showing you this is because of the following. You can remove contingencies and not remove all of them. You can just remove some of them. And this form explains that. If I just want to remove the inspection contingency, I can say that. If I want to remove all contingencies except the loan contingency, I would do that here on this box. Sorry. Yeah, on this box. If I want to remove all contingencies, I would check off this box. If you have a buyer and you check off that box and they sign it and you return it to the listing agent, that is when your deposit is toast. But before that happens, you don't lose your deposit. The buyer does not lose their deposit. It could be day 30. If they haven't signed this form, they can't keep your money. If they haven't signed this form. So the listing agent, if you represent a buyer, okay, here it comes. If you represent a buyer, This is the form that the listing agent has to give you. Notice to buyer to perform. This form, so again, 17 days. So it's on the 18th day and your buyer hasn't signed the contingency removal that we just showed you. They haven't signed that. It's the 20th day. They still haven't signed it. And you decide, I'm not gonna sign the contingency removal. If the listing agent hasn't told me to sign it, I'm not gonna sign it. The listing agent has to give you this form. It's called the notice to buyer to perform. Here comes the bad way to say this, so here it goes. This is the shit or get off the pot form. And they can't just send it to you just like this. They have to check off this box. Yeah, okay. Yeah. So they have to check off this all contingency box, have their seller sign it, and give it to you. And guess what? The clock starts. The minute they give this to you, you have 2 days. You have 2 days to then sign it, to then have your buyer sign that contingency removal form.
And this is telling me,
Telling you, the buyer's agent,
what is this telling me?
if you get this from a listing agent, it's telling you, the buyer's agent, you better get your buyer to sign that other form, the contingency removal, within 2 days, or I'm canceling you. You're welcome to come in, Mario. I'm done with you. Like, I gave you an opportunity, and usually a listing agent doesn't throw out this notice to buyer to perform. Some are afraid to give it to the buyer's agent because they're like, oh, I don't want to scare them away. But other times you got to do it. Sometimes you just got to do it. But the point of the story is if you represent the buyer, you're not obligated to sign this technically until they give you this notice. But sometimes it's like, oh gosh, don't wait until the So, but talk to us about it, especially in your first few. You kind of get the feel for it. All right. All right. Ooh, yeah.
There's
So-
some tough Orange County agents that just do it as a matter of fact.
And yeah.
Or Jeff Allensworth, for that matter.
Yeah.
On 2 days before they're supposed to be removed, he sends it to you.
Because you're allowed to send it 2 days before the 17th day. You can do it whenever, but no closer than 2 days before.
Well, 2 days before you send the contingency, so if the contingency removal is due today, they can send you the form 2 days before.
Right.
But then you have to wait for those 2 days to go up, and then you have to send the notice to perform, which then gives them another 2 days, right?
Yeah.
But at the end of those 4 days, they can cancel on. Which one?
Oh, I'm
All
taking you saying.
right.
Put in a scenario. And my idea,
So-
you said is that like about this.
No, I was gonna say, like, I know you don't really like sending those.
I mean, I try not to, but you
Yeah.
do.
I was gonna say, is that good practice?
It's good practice to send it. It's better practice to send it.
Just remember, real estate is very fluid.
Yeah.
There's a good word. And
All
you
right.
have to take Fernando posted something that was great, that he got his offer accepted because he communicated with the agent. So it all boils down to when you're an escrow and they're not communicating, you are gonna get one of those, you know.
Yeah. 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 And
So it's fluid when you have a good relationship with the other person.
That's what I meant, because sometimes they go underground.
Yeah.
And they're avoiding the listing agent.
Or out of the country or whatever. their
Whatever it
excuse
is.
is.
They're just,
and you're going to move on. You need the only way to move on is to first send them this notice to perform. And then if they don't do that, then you send them a cancellation. Okay. All right. I'm going to move on, and we're obviously going to run out of time, but so this part is, let's say the house has a freestanding stove, a range and oven, like the slot one, but you can take it away. If you want that range and oven to stay, you have to check off the box on this part. So this part right here is what freestanding items, or sometimes built-in, do you want to go with the property, right? Okay, and so that's like the difference between personal property and real property. Okay. So, but they've gotten very creative because of technology. We now have video doorbells, so Ring doorbells, security cameras, you know, all of that. And so
Attached to the house.
it's, there you go. So there is, it happens a lot where the seller says, oh no, I'm taking that Ring doorbell. It's like, no, it's there. Well, it's mine. I paid $500 for it. That's nice. It's there. Oh no, I'll replace it. I'll put back a doorbell. And that's okay too, but the buyer has to agree to it.
Right.
So the best way to do it is write it in. And then Mario just said something. In the MLS,
Figures.
there are inclusions and exclusions. Like in the MLS, it may say, oh, they are excluding the Ring doorbell, or they're excluding the cameras. So you want to always read all of that.
And also, when you're writing the offer, you better be there with your buyer. If they really want something, they better know what they want to write it in.
Right.
Be specific. Don't be waiting for the last minute and then you have a big fight as
Right.
to what we're supposed to say. And then those Ring doorbells, just FYI, the owner always has to get it out of their name for the new buyer. And that has been a real pain in the butt.
Yeah.
Because then the fellow, well, I did do it. No, you didn't. And they need to send email. So just make sure that you follow up with the Ring doorbell because it's not that easy
Right.
when they're attached.
Okay. So if you want to
The
exclusive,
problem with personal, this is personal property.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
What's the biggest problem? Things that are not fixed.
yeah, I mean, yeah,
Or
person,
Appear to be fixed is
Right.
another one.
right. Right.
How about
What would
that?
be,
Yeah.
what would be a peer?
But it's-
Instead fixed.
Oh, okay.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Attached.
Yeah.
How about those barbecues, those nasty barbecues that are freestanding?
Yeah, I mean,
I mean, those are the things that's where you run into trouble at the end. Or like the people-
so they finally added this one, like potted plants here. So how about charging stations now?
What is it?
Charging stations are on here now, finally. They just added that. Yeah. All right. So
Okay.
when we did, we're actually just about done. This is the last page. When we wrote the offer a couple weeks ago, these were kind of the best way to do it, let's say. So that you usually write seller for here. You write check off environmental, which just means you get a little fancier natural hazard report. I'll leave it at that for now. Provided by seller's choice. So if you want to take a snapshot of this with your phone,
Just put all sellers.
this
Okay.
is a decent looking on this page. Okay. And so this one, I'm gonna just talk about Q5 and Q6. If you are selling a house in a city that has a pre-sale inspection, that's what Q5 and Q6 are.
So always ask Carmen, what
Right.
cities have a pre-sale?
And so
You'd be
this,
Surprised, Newport Beach has a pre-sale.
so this house was Seal Beach. And I wasn't sure, but I didn't, but I checked off seller, so I protected myself.
Okay.
Seal Beach does not have one, but
Okay, is there a way to find out on the outside or?
You
just
can-
have to-
We have a
you,
list.
we have a
of
list. You know, you could call the city of Seal Beach and find out too, okay? Escrow, this is kind of the norm. You check off each to pay their own, okay? And you write seller's choice usually. If you represent a listing, right? And they ask, if you represent a listing and they wrote here ABC escrow, on your counter offer, you're gonna say seller's choice,
Okay.
okay? So that way you can choose,
And then the escrow fee is a certain percentage. as
right?
well.
And we're gonna do that in a couple weeks. Yeah, promise.
What if you ask?
How much is the escrow fee? Yeah, it's $2 per thousand plus a $325 starting point base. Yeah, so if it's $1 million, it's $2,000 plus $325, so it's $2,325. All right, title fee also, since you just said that, there's a sheet you can look at to get a general idea, and but the title fee is usually for a seller, the title insurance policy, but we'll talk about that. Okay, and then transfer taxes. So there's always a county transfer tax. I knew that the city of Seal Beach does not have a city transfer tax, but if I wasn't sure, I should have written this, to be honest. If I wasn't sure. Okay, transfer tax is 1.25, 1.1. I'm thinking property taxes. So yeah, so if it's $1 million, the transfer tax is $1,100. So you do 1,000 times 1.1.
But if you're representing the buyer, that's really the seller's problem.
Right.
They're the one that.
So I checked off seller, so I don't have to worry about it.
And also remember that the city of LA, Pomona, there's cities that have transfer taxes. And it could be up to $6.50 total for county and city transfer tax.
Isn't that nuts? The LA is 4.5. 4.5.
It's always been,
LA has always been $4.50 per thousand. Isn't that nuts?
just for the city,
Just for the city.
that's without the county, so it's 5.
So it's 5 point, yeah.
I don't remember that.
All right. And then home warranty is here. We talked about home warranty the other day. Okay, always adding Chris. Shame on me. I didn't add Chris.
Oh, God.
Oh, no.
I wrote 5,000 plus. I didn't write Chris.
That's not okay. You still have to put crap.
However, Carmen is my safety blanket. She makes sure we have Chris because she's the one that orders it. So. All right. So the rest of this is more explanation. We talked about most of them as we were going. Okay. Questions? No? Okay. It's a lot. Do you have zip forms? Do you have access to zip forms? Okay. You have access?
I don't.
You
I
don't?
was trying to get into it, and it didn't let me,
Bye, Jahara. I'm gonna sign off, okay?
Oh, okay.
And you had your.
but- Yeah, I
orientation,
did.
And they should have given you your